You're supposed to be acting out of love. But the line between being motivated by your obligations and being motivated by love is a thin one, and it often gets crossed. Hello, I'm Caitee Cooper, fantasy author, tired stay-at-home mom, and painter.
And I'm Dallin Cooper, nonfiction author, and I very thematically painted this picture of bamboo after a 30-minute lesson when I was in China, proving that even someone with virtually no painting skill can paint semi-adequate bamboo with minimal instruction.
And that is very relevant to our book today that we're going to talk about, which I am so excited for. It has become one of my all-time favorite books, and that's Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. So I know this book came out several months ago. We have toddlers, so we're a little behind on our TBR.
There is a lot to talk about here, so let's just dive right in. What's first on your list?
Probably the thing that stood out to me the hardest was Yumi's struggle with being a yokihijo, because it feels so much like motherhood, parenthood. So for people who have not read this book, a little catch up. Yumi is what's called a yokihijo. She's one of only 14 people in the entire world that can command the spirits. And the planet that they live on is really, really harsh. And so they rely on the spirits to bring them water so that they can grow food, to help them with just the basic necessities of day-to-day living. So the fact that she can call spirits is kind of a big deal, because if she doesn't, people die, like on a societal collapse level.
Which is bad. It's so bad.
So basically, Yumi lives her entire life for other people. The task is huge, and there's no stinking way that she can ever accomplish it all. And if you're a parent, that might sound familiar. Now, fellow parents, I don't know if you feel the same way, but I feel like no matter how much I give my kids, no matter how much time, talent, effort, energy, it's just never enough. It can never be enough. I feel like I could always do better, like I'm just perpetually inadequate. And you can see it that she's really heavily motivated by guilt and obligation. So much so that she feels guilty for even taking a break or wanting to do something different. And I feel that. I love being a mom and I adore our kids, but I want to do other things too. And I felt horribly guilty about wanting to do those other things like writing and painting and hiking out in the mountains and stuff, and doing anything that isn't just giving my whole life and every second to my children. It got so bad that I actually became clinically depressed for a little while because I thought that wanting to do anything else made me a bad mom and maybe even a bad person. So I was immediately drawn to Yumi as a character.
She had some lines that were chillingly similar to things that you've told me. Like, frighteningly similar to a mom who has nothing left to give.
Yeah, some that really stood out to me were, it would be better if I were just a machine. And you cannot let yourself be happy because happiness is dangerous. When I was in the pits with postpartum depression, I said both those things almost verbatim. And I feel like there's this kind of tacit undercurrent that doing anything that makes you happy is almost a bad thing in some circles. And that really reinforced my postpartum depression pits. And I've never seen a book hit this so head on in a way that was so clear and so helpful.
I think that stems from what I'm calling cultures of obligation. Yumi lives in a culture of obligation, where the things you do are dictated primarily by what you should do, or by what's proper. It's a very communal, non-individual mindset, which is appropriately much more common in Asian countries than it is in Western countries. But you can see cultures of obligation in any country, anywhere in the world. Anywhere that uses guilt or shame to pressure people into behaving a certain way, but especially if that pressure is to make them do more than is healthy. There are some companies that create cultures of obligation for their employees.
And you would know a lot about that since business culture is one of your areas of expertise.
Yeah, in business, it's especially easy to do in nonprofits because again, you're trying to do good. You can see it in some clubs, volunteer organizations, churches, even many families.
And there seems to be a pattern in those places, like nonprofits, families, churches, because in all those places, you're supposed to be acting out of love. But the line between being motivated by your obligations and being motivated by love is a thin one, and it often gets crossed. And I know I walk that line a dangerous amount, and Yumi does it. She loves her people and she wants to help them, but she takes it way too far and it becomes really toxic. So my parents are very wise.
Okay, Ben. Give me your wisdom.
but my dad once told me that fear is the lowest motivator. Duty is acceptable, but love is the highest and purest form of motivation. And my parents always encouraged me to strive for that, to do things out of love. The problem is that can circle back around and turn into a vice really easily if you don't draw the proper boundaries. Because when your well runs dry, you switch to obligation. I think sometimes we do switch into obligation, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's really easy for that then to devolve into being fear-based, because what if they don't like you? Because what if they see that you can't do it all, and you can't be it all, and you're not the person that they thought that you were, or whatever? It becomes fear of losing someone, of losing their trust, of losing their friendship, or their love, or,
It almost sounds like you're describing insecurity.
Yeah.
It just becomes insecurity that if you don't give absolutely everything out of obligation or fear or anything, then people won't care about you anymore.
Yeah, because heaven forbid that they see that you can't do it all.
Fun fact, you can't.
No, you can't. Get help.
You are not doing get help.
Get help! That's
Yeah.
actually one of my favorite ways to have character flaws in books, is to take a positive trait and push it too far so it loops back around to being a negative trait or a flaw.
Yeah.
That's actually a really common theme in my sphere, in nonfiction books. A lot of leadership or self-help type books will have all these attributes you want to develop or things you should do, and they'll have to have a section on balance, more or less. I did it in mine. Honesty is good, but if it isn't tempered by compassion, it can just become cruelty. Grit and determination are amazing characteristics, but if you take them too far, they can become obsession and burnout.
Those are definitely very realistic and relatable
Relatable.
character flaws. Those are definitely very realistic and relatable character flaws. And to me, that makes them much more interesting than characters who are just, the typical lazy or selfish or self-righteous.
Yes, and I thought of another good example, which is Encanto. It is very much a culture of obligation. The abuela wants to help and serve the people.
Will you serve this community?
But it went too far. Both surface pressure and the flower song that I forgot the name of hit people really hard because everyone feels that crushing weight of obligation at some point in their life.
Watch as she buckles and bends but never breaks. No mistakes.
Like, we've all been there.
What's really beautiful about Yumi's arc is that she learns balance, which is actually paralleled in The Rocks, which is way cool. Good job, Brandon Sanderson. It's like you're really good at writing or something. Some voices in society would say that Yumi is just suppressed, and we've talked about this a lot. I feel like there's kind of a spectrum. On the one hand, you have the voices that say what Liyun is telling Yumi. Live for everyone around you, and you don't really matter as much. And on the other hand, you have the voices that say, live for yourself, do whatever you want, just do whatever makes you happy. And Yumi is able to find a balance where she is still taking care of herself, but she's also having loving and fulfilling relationships and being able to sacrifice some for the people that she loves, but not in a way that tears her soul apart. You know what I mean?
Yeah, she's able to serve out of love instead of duty. She still serves, but her motivation's able to change because she's taking care of herself.
Yeah.
And that makes her relationships and friendships so much more healthy and also attainable.
And that's another thing that I love about Brandon Sanderson's books. He writes romances and relationships that are completely swoon-worthy, but are also realistic and attainable and healthy.
Mostly.
Yeah. That was the exception, but...
The other theme that was along this line, and is maybe even more serious, is that Yumi was really just straight up abused. Like, emotionally manipulated and abused her entire life.
Yeah, Liyun fills the role of the repressive, emotionally abusive caretaker, like in every possible way. And it takes Yumi ages to recognize it as abuse.
Yeah, even once Yumi recognizes how awful Liyun is being, she loves her anyway, which is exactly how abusive relationships go, where people will admit this isn't healthy, but I just love them too much. And she starts seeing things differently once she sees Painter's world some, and then she gets back into her world and goes right into the same patterns and habits.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, and that's incredibly human. That's why abusive situations and relationships are so hard to break out of.
And to be fair, as far as we're aware, Liyun is not trying to be awful. She seems very sincere. It's more like a situation of generational trauma or generational abuse where parents mistreat and abuse their children because that's all they've ever known. That's how they were treated.
Yeah, so that's what they think that they're supposed to do.
And it doesn't make abuse okay. It's still obviously awful, but it isn't out of malice. And in Lee Yoon's situation, it may legitimately be born out of a sense of love or duty, which is still bad, but not the simple, straightforward, oh, you're evil that you initially feel as a reader about Lee Yoon.
Yeah, Lee Yoon was way more nuanced than I first thought she was going to be, which I like. What was really difficult and powerful for me about Lee Yoon in particular, actually, was how much she sounded like the voice in my own head. Like, I've never been abused. I was really lucky to have really good parents. I've talked about them a little bit already. But I still felt so seen reading this book in a way that was both encouraging and heartbreaking. There was one line in there, crushing her wanderlust, her dreams until they were as flat as paper. Abuse is a much more effective form of captivity than any cell. That resonated so much, but in my life, the voice that keeps me captive is usually my own.
I think a lot of people might hear this and think that the theme of abuse with Lee Yoon isn't going to resonate with them because they haven't been abused.
But again, here I am sitting here saying how much it's resonating with me, who has not been abused, except for by myself. It casts such a light on my internal narrative. Like, I wouldn't take that crap from anybody else, and yet here I am saying those things to myself. How is that okay?
Plot twist, it is not.
It's not. This is a transformative realization from this book for me. That's probably why I liked it so much. I don't know.
I think a lot of people will resonate with Yumi. One scene that I really enjoyed from her was her let's do something improper scene. It was fun and funny, but it also had this undertone that kind of reminded me of Tangled, and of some people that I've known in real life. When you have been repressed and gaslit for your entire life, and then you get a taste of freedom, people tend to go a little bit nuts. That's why super strict parenting tends to backfire, because then the kids leave home and they haven't developed any personal regulation skills and they just go insane. And Yumi does that same thing, granted in a less self-destructive way than kids normally do.
Helps to not be like in your body.
Yes.
There's not much she can do because she's like still kind of has Painter's job to try and keep up, but you know. So we've covered Yumi a lot. Are you ready to move on to Painter?
Yeah, Painter was interesting because from the title, I thought he was going to be the villain. You read Nightmare Painter and you think, bad guy.
That's gotta be the villain. She's gotta fall in love with the villain.
I didn't even know it was a romance. I read nothing about this book before I started reading it.
Oh, I looked at the cover and I was like, that's a romance. Maybe, I don't know. We could talk about cover tropes in another post, but yeah.
I didn't connect with his themes as much as I did with Yumi. I guess I just don't really see myself in him as much. I don't consider myself an artist, and I've definitely never felt as abandoned or alone as he did. So, fine character, but he didn't pierce my soul in the same way Yumi did.
Yeah, I loved Nakaro. I thought he was great. But I'm going to push back a little bit on that. I actually think that everybody is an artist in some form or another. And you do these magnificent keynote speeches. You can teach, and you can control a room, and you can just rivet people and make them laugh and make them cry. And I think that's incredible. If that's not an art form, I don't know what is. And you also edit these videos, which is art. But I do see what you mean, that you don't feel like you're as much of an artist in a traditional, I paint things type sense.
Yeah, this bamboo is probably one of the best things I've ever painted, because painting bamboo is easy. The one part of his story that I did really love and connect with is how much his arc and conflict was related to communication and conflict resolution. You know this, Caitee, but our viewers probably don't, which is that those are like my whole thing. Those two topics. I write books about them, I make videos about them, I do workshops and keynotes and trainings, all about communication and conflict resolution. And I like that one of the big takeaways from Painter's arc is that avoiding the truth, avoiding the awkward conversations, doesn't eliminate the conflict, it doesn't avoid the conflict. All it does is prolong and amplify the conflict.
Tell her the truth!
I thought you might like that part. Anytime a story has a plotline that that people could just resolve their conflict if they would just be honest with each other, I think of you.
That is kind of my jam. But did the artist-painter side of it resonate more with you as someone who is an artist, an author, a painter?
Oh man, yeah. As an author, as a painter, as a general appreciator of beauty, I love so many things in this world that it sometimes feels like a curse. I'm not kidding. And mostly I just love to share those things with people that I love. That's like my driving force as a person. Just like painter. I totally get it. I totally get it. And I think that many artists of all kinds are the same way. And I think that one of the biggest things that hit me out of Painter's Arc was this idea of being so bad at something and not realizing it, and then when you do realize it, it's so crushing, and you just feel like you shouldn't even do it. I actually had this experience when I was first writing Silverskin.
Oh, I remember this.
Yeah, you know what's coming. So you'd read it, and you thought it was pretty good. You said that it surprised you with how decent it was.
Yeah, I thought it was amazing.
Yeah. Which, first of all, thank you. You're supposed to think that, but I appreciate it anyway. And I gave it to my family, and they liked it. And I gave it to some friends, and they liked it. And they were the type of friends that I thought would have told me it was bad if it was bad. But they didn't. The feedback was fix a thing here and there, but it was mostly positive. And I even had a couple of professional beta readers say that they really liked it. They had great feedback to give me, and I was feeling like pretty hot stuff. And then I sent it off to my developmental editor, and I got feedback back from her about 3 weeks later, and it basically was, your writing is great. You're a pro-level writer, but your story sucks. And I was like, let me just go pull this knife out of my chest real quick. Because when you hear something like that, I had poured my heart and soul into this silly little book, and at that time I just thought it was silly. I was so crushed. And I remember coming to you and saying, I have wasted my time. Why didn't you tell me that this was bad? Why didn't you save me all this pain? I could have not embarrassed myself in front of my friends and family. I could have just never done this in the first place and not wasted our money, because developmental editing is expensive, if you didn't know. And I was just thinking, I never should have done this. I wish that I had known that I was not good. And it was so tempting to just give up writing and to just be done. And I didn't. But that's partially because I had so many people encouraging me, including said developmental editor, because we got on a call and she gave me a really great pep talk that I really needed to hear. And so great things came out of it, but Painter didn't have any of that in the book. He didn't have the support. And I think that a lot of artists, potential artists, don't have that. So if we can, I think it's important to support and help other artists, because you don't know when you're all they've got.
Yeah, that was really hard to watch just as someone who loves you, to see you so discouraged. That was the worst.
It was rough.
And that other thing, you mentioned it briefly, that really reminded me of you with Painter was that love to share the art, to share the thing you love. That's something you've told me for years.
Yeah, like my paintings, I have no desire to keep any of my paintings ever. I paint them so that other people can take them and enjoy them. If nobody wanted them, I wouldn't do it. And it isn't just art. I mean, I love sharing everything I care about, which is a lot of things. The one that comes to mind really quickly is the mountains. I love the mountains. I love nature. And I go hike alone. Well, before children, I wouldn't hike alone. But it's so much more fulfilling, and it brings me so much more joy to have you with me, appreciating it and just enjoying the peace out there with you and our children. I enjoy hiking with our children now because they are hilarious. I get so much joy from sharing art and beauty with other people, and I don't think I've ever seen a character, at least I've never had one that hit me as hard as Painter did with sharing that characteristic. It was really cool to see.
All right, before we move to our fairly short spoiler section, let's address the romance. Brandon Sanderson is not known for his romance writing, but I personally love them. The romances in Warbreaker and in Wax and Wayne are two of my favorite romances in any books ever, because they aren't like other romances in books. They're very unique. But this one played a little bit more to standard romance tropes.
Yeah, it's definitely Sanderson's most romantic book that I can think of. But in true Sanderson fashion, he played with those tropes and did them in a way that was kind of unexpected. Like, yeah, you had the Ferris wheel date trope, And then the whole book is pretty much a forced proximity trope. Just so you know, the Ferris wheel trope is basically if you have a romance with a carnival scene, there's going to be something really cute that happens between the love interests on the Ferris wheel.
And specifically, they always end up on a Ferris wheel type thing alone, regardless of the maximum capacity of the seats.
Yes, always. And the forced proximity trope is when two people, usually from very different circumstances, are forced to spend a lot of time together, and it usually leads them to fall in love.
I didn't even realize it was the forced proximity trope at first, because in my head I was thinking of it as like a pen pal type romance.
Oh, I could see that.
But I always see those easily. I see the pen pal type romance in everything because I had a very influential pen pal growing up, but it checked a lot of those same boxes, right? You had a person that you talk to constantly, that nobody else but you knows, that you share your life and soul with, but that you never actually have any physical contact with. So it's difficult for it to truly be romantic, but it has all of the other elements and characteristics of a really deep and mature relationship. Again, because of my personal experience, I love those types of stories where the people fall in love as people first. They love who the other person is before there's any sort of physical romantic connection. Just because I've lived the experience of having a best friend, and specifically a female best friend, that I had never even met.
Yeah, the first version of Silverskin had a lot of that. And I absolutely loved it. And I had to shrink the timeline a little bit to make it work. So some of that got cut out, but I really tried to keep the two people are falling in love with each other because they're organically becoming best friends. And the physical attraction comes later. I love that trope so much. I'm totally with you on that. And readers, speaking of, please tell us your favorite romance trope in the comments. We want to talk about more tropes and that kind of thing. So if you have any suggestions, please leave a comment. We want to hear it. Also, shout out to Emily Sanderson for making Brandon write a romance because it's so great. You're the best. Thank you so much.
As if Emily Sanderson is watching this video.
I know. Just in case.
We love you, Emily.
You're great. So, on to the spoilers?
Yeah! Though, I think it's worth noting that you can eliminate the plot twists and the spoilers and everything, and it doesn't even matter. Like, if you got rid of the Sanderlanche and all of the crazy stuff at the end, this book would still be amazing, which is nuts.
This is maybe one of the only books I've ever read where the rising action carries the whole thing.
Yes, by the time we reached the twists, I was just like, I don't even care. This could go 100 different ways, and I'm fine with any of them, because the characters and the story have been so good. The ending is basically irrelevant.
But we do still want to talk about the ending. And for this section, we're going to assume that you've read the book. The thing that hit me so hard was I was reading the end of this book was how much it parallels AI in our society right now.
Even though it was written before AI got big.
Yeah!
So this was part of the Kickstarter that happened in March of 2022. DALL-E 2 came out and started making really bad, just horrifically bad AI images right after that Kickstarter, just a couple months after, and ChatGPT didn't come out until November of 2022, when the Kickstarter was about to start shipping.
And I actually remember you sending me some pictures that you and your friend at work had cooked up using DALL-E, and I was like, these are horrific. These are the nightmares that Painter is trying to paint away. They were awful.
Well, and we laughed and joked about the AI images then. It was like, there's no practical application of these because they were just so consistently bad.
But then they got better, like way better.
And this was written before any of those tools came out, but the idea of a machine trying to imitate art and creating art in a way that destroys the literal spirit and souls of the thing is so very AI.
Yeah, it's crazy. And that is insane that it's become so much more relevant now, but it wasn't when he wrote it. And I know that you're not as scared of it as I am, but I really worry about AI, especially as someone who is both a writer and an artist. I especially worry about what it will do to writing as a profession. But the thing about this was it felt like it was such a big justification of those worries, but also such a comfort because he talks so much about the value that we ascribe a thing.
And it isn't the art that matters, it's the value we assign it, even if the only person assigning it value is the artist, which is something that AI can never take away.
Yeah, do you remember that guy that duct taped that banana to the canvas and then it sold for like millions of dollars?
I think it wasn't even duct taped to a canvas. I think it was just taped to a wall.
Yeah, exactly. I'd like to see an AI do that.
That's actually just a big win for marketing because you had to replace the banana because it got old. So they didn't sell the banana. They sold the idea of a banana taped to a wall, and they replaced the banana every few weeks or days or whatever. That's just marketing or maybe money laundering at its finest.
Oh my gosh. Why are human beings the way we are? Okay.
And I didn't even pick up on the AI parallels at first. You had to point that out to me because I was so focused on the giant Cosmere lore dump that was happening. I think the machine is the only other awakened object we have seen in the Cosmere except for Nightblood. But the other thing I was thinking of is that I didn't really love the machine twist. It took the book a direction that isn't where I saw it going. But again, I didn't care that I didn't love it. I maybe would have ended it with a little bit less of, oh, everything was fake in the end, but it just didn't matter to me. Again, as long as Yumi and Painter ended up together, it could have ended whatever way, and I wouldn't care. It was all about the themes and the characters for me.
Yeah, I agree. That's probably my one complaint about this book is that I do feel like it kind of switched genres into more of a hard sci-fi-y area, which is not what I usually love. But again, I was 25% of the way through this book, and I already knew that I just absolutely adored it. Because the characters and the pacing was just so good from the get-go, and their arc was so clear and so satisfying. It was so satisfying to watch them learn and grow as people that I don't care if you take a turn for the hard sci-fi, like, do it. I'm on board.
There is so much more we could talk about with this book. The interesting contrast of a secular versus a spiritual society, the principles of romance, and a whole pile of incredibly quotable lines. But we have to call it somewhere, and I feel like it may as well be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. Please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. It means the world to us.
Be sure to join us next time where we'll have another video where we'll talk about something else.